Our overreactions to NFL Week 7. That is the topic of discussion today on RotoViz Overtime, as myself, Colm Kelly, Shawn, Siegele break down some of our thoughts on what happened on Sunday. We're going to start off, Shawn, with my Green Bay Packers and the Houston Texans for this one. It was, in general, a tough Sunday of watching, scoring down across the board. If you go in and look at pretty much, this is what happened to me anyway, went in and looked at all the formats I'm playing in, whether it's best ball, redraft, season-long, dynasty, whatever it is. A lot of the teams a lot of them struggling to crack 100 points across the board. I did see one team in particular, Shawn, in our latest dynasty startup that we did that crested 186 points. I had to go in and see how this magic happened. But a tough week, injuries across the board, down scoring, poor quarterback play, early quarterback injuries to the likes of Jaden Daniels, for example, Aidan O'Connell, who a lot of people probably aren't starting in their lineups, but did suffer a broken thumb. He was out. Minshew came in. Lots of different switches across the league with low scoring and I guess passing productivity numbers taking a hit. Massive week for the running backs. We'll talk about some of those as well as we work through today's show. But Shawn, starting on the Packers game, and I know you want to get into the Packers, but what happened to the Texans passing game? It's not as simple as Nico Collins is not available. They did struggle outside of his plays prior to him getting hurt, but CJ Stroud, 10 of 20 in this one, 86 passing yards. Are the Packers defense just that good? Is that what we're going to start to come down to? Because I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think they're above average, but this was a tough outing for the Texans, although they almost got the win here. 4 sacks for 31 yards as well on Stroud. So before we get to the Packers, are we putting this down to one of those kind of tough week, everything went wrong? Or is it a case that this is more of an ongoing trend for CJ Stroud and the Texans?
Yeah, it's both. And number one, I want to say, I love the fact that you have decided to go with an overreaction show in week 7. I mean, anybody can do overreaction in week 1. We're going to overreact to week 7. Yeah, I think that the Texans...
The sky is falling.
The sky is falling. I mean, this was very much a best of times, worst of times week where there were actually quite a few things that went well, that went right, and that were exciting, and there were things to get behind as you watched week 7 on Sunday. But as we detailed last night at Sealing Bananas, we had a number of receivers hit 0, which Tank Dell and the drop touchdown pass is included in that group. But then we had receivers who went into the minus. Now, because of PPR scoring, you tend to get like a 0.6, but to have several of our favorite receivers have negative yardage for the day, that part was tough. And then, Colm, my 2 quarterbacks who are in probably 2/3 of my leagues are CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels. They combined for about 10 points yesterday. So that is pretty challenging to overcome. You can't take those massive hits at the quarterback position. And your question as to whether this is the Packers, whether it's a fluky game, whether the Texans have some things that have collapsed at this point, I think that a lot of it is on the Texans. And one of the things that you see when you look at Blair's wrong read write-up from last week is that they are having trouble with all of the blitz, pressure, time to throw, time to pressure elements. And they're also not really getting yards after the catch for their receivers. That was another problem here today. When Stephon Diggs does make a play, he's tackled right where he is. When Tank Dell is targeted, even if he catches some of those and he has, obviously, again, the touchdown drop, but then additional plays that you would kind of like to see him make, he wasn't set up to catch a ball and then finish the play for a 30, 40, 50-yard touchdown. That's not what the Texans are opening up right now. And you would have expected this to be a game where they could right the ship a little bit because the Packers don't blitz a lot. They allow a lot of time to throw. They allow a pretty decent amount of separation. And yet they played against trend in this particular game as their run defense has improved since week 1 against Saquon Barkley and been very good. This was, again, the run defense that we saw against Barkley, where they're just allowing themselves to be gashed for big plays over and over and over. As I said last night, I did think Joe Mixon looked very good in this game. He should get some credit. But the Packers were relentless in getting to Stroud. Stroud looked confused, overmatched, took a bunch of sacks. The coordinator, Bobby Slowick, who got so much praise last season, and I think very deservedly so, is struggling badly in 2024. I do think a decent amount of this has to be put on the head coach as well, where they have an above-average defense. When they have Joe Mixon, they have a strong running game. They appear to think that they can win sort of in the style that the Chiefs are winning right now, which, I mean, frankly, the Chiefs have gotten a little bit lucky in some of the games. They're playing it too close to the vest. They're letting these games be too competitive. This is the game where everything went right for them in terms of turnovers and fluky plays, and they still lose. You simply can't do that if you have CJ Stroud, and if you think you have anything at the receiver position. Right now, the internal evaluation of Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell seems like it's not particularly strong.
Yeah, we've seen 2 games with the Packers this season where they've kind of let teams run on them. That was kind of a situation here again where against the Colts, kind of similar, where they tried to go with the rush more. But we have 33 rush attempts in this game to the 21 pass attempts, but really nothing happening through the air. The Packers had some defensive injuries as the game progressed as well. May have led to, the increased success for the Texans running game. But Joe Mixon looking good in this. The first touchdown he does get in this, and looking at how those points were put up in total for the Texans, it was a muff punt that led to the short field that they get in for that second quarter touchdown. And this one, you mentioned some of the fluky plays. The Packers did get a little bit lucky in this one. Outside of that, they had a potential backways pass to Reed that was incomplete. The Texans don't challenge it in time. The Packers go quick, and that's what led to the touchdown for Dontavian Wicks on that particular play. I think that would have been ruled as a backward pass, which would have led to a turnover there. So the Packers smartly getting up to the line quick to go for that. And again, I've mentioned this multiple times with the aggressiveness of Jordan Love and these chances. That aggressiveness almost cost them at the end of this. They're kind of in field goal range, and he's taking a shot towards the end zone, which could have been potentially picked off. So there is, some parts where the aggressiveness could be counted, but it's great to see on those plays. The other play, the Tucker Kraft touchdown, incredible catch by Tucker Kraft, great throw there. There was almost a couple of other big plays. Jordan Reed ends up with a very low scoring day. But in this one, he draws a deep pass interference. He also has a long reception that he could have had to end the half about 30 yards, but cannot survive the ground with that one. Shawn, the Packers side of things, what do you want to head on here? And I know there's lots of plays that are not looking good, but I have to say there's some plays where Josh Jacobs looks like he's a capable running back. Is that a step too far?
Yes, I think it is. I picked up Marshawn Lloyd everywhere this last week. It does sound like he's not that far from returning.
Yeah.
And they were pretty reluctant to use Emmanuel Wilson in this game. Now, he didn't do that much. Josh Jacobs, they didn't lean on either. It was a pretty stark contrast between the two teams, where one team has CJ Stroud, and they're like, we'll go ahead and let Joe Mixon do the work here. The other team has Josh Jacobs, and I would put Jacobs and Mixon in that same general group, although Mixon, despite where he is with his peripherals, I think we have to give him credit for just a lot better intuitive understanding of the running game than Josh Jacobs, who runs into tacklers, breaks tackles, doesn't gain yards. Joe Mixon understands that what you're trying to do is gain yards and score touchdowns. So from that perspective, I think you could make the claim that at least I have been undervaluing him at times through his career. Now, again, he's gotten to play for the Bengals and the Texans. Yeah, I mean, if you're Josh Jacobs, you had a decent game. You had a 27-yard run. You get 5 receptions, which I think, again, is a pretty flagrant misuse of resources. You would like to see more yardage out of that, but he scores a touchdown, right? So it ends up as a very strong game for Josh Jacobs.
One note on that, Shawn. His catch, he had a catch in this, he's tackled at I think it was the 8-yard line. He then gets a target on the next pass, which he catches and takes in for the receiving touchdown. 212th reception of his career. First time he's ever had a receiving touchdown. Was the current longest streak in NFL history for 211 receptions with no TDs. That's exceptional.
Oh, Josh Jacobs. Yeah, I mean, this was a frustrating game with Jayden Reed not going off and with Romeo Doubs drawing the 10 targets. But one of the things that you've gotten now is that Doubs is creating some value down the field. As a 23-yard gain in this one, you get the 30-yard gain to Dontavian Wicks. He scores a touchdown. Colm, you and I have him on our main event.
On the bench. Sometimes
you can have players in redraft who end up with a decent season from the overall line is fine. When you had them in the lineup, they were just a whole over and over and over perform a little bit better on the bench. As you mentioned, Tucker Kraft, fantastic in this one. We didn't get a lot from Christian Watson, which I thought was mildly disappointing coming off of the game that he had the previous week. But the main thing here is that we are seeing what we expected, which is a 4-receiver rotation where Watson is the deep guy, Jayden Reed is the do-everything superstar with the manufactured touches and the deep shots. You have Doubs as a little bit more of a possession receiver, and you have Wicks as the wild card. You have Jordan Love attacking down the field, and right now, I don't know that we have any other passing game in football that is accomplishing these types of things. The weird part about it is that perhaps the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Detroit Lions with Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, not players who a couple of years ago you would have said, I mean, these are going to be the guys leading the juggernauts. Maybe those teams are in the mix. Certainly Baltimore has moved the ball and scored at will. That will be an exciting game tonight. But I think you have to be extremely excited as a Packers fan right now. I think the Packers and the Lions are pretty clearly heading toward a meeting in the NFC Championship game. Where were you with their performance yesterday, where they do barely survive at home in a game where CJ Stroud doesn't do anything? I mean, you could look at that either direction. You can give your own defense a lot of credit, or you can say, I mean, how do you barely win a game in which an MVP caliber opponent plays so poorly?
Yeah, so this is one going in where you're like, this is going to be a tough contest. You know, hopefully we get a win against the Texans and CJ Stroud. As the game went on, it didn't develop the way, you know, if this game had been, 37-34 or something, you're like, well, you survived in a shootout. But as you mentioned, the Texans passing game was non-existent. We were going against the rushing efforts of Joe Mixon. But I do think, the 2 interceptions, the muff punt, given those 3 turnovers, is going to lead to tougher situations to try and overcome. So they had to overcome those, and they were able to. So I think this is one where, as a team supporter, you're like, well, we got over the line, and it's a win to get you to 5-2. And then obviously you mentioned the situation with potential NFC Championship implications. We'll talk about the Lions next, but with the Lions beating the Vikings, that leads to, closing up very tightly in that division with how things are set up. So they are now 5-2 on the season. The way the game played out, I think there's just some miscommunications, some kind of missed assignments from certain players. If you look at that Jayden Reed play, for example, at the end of the half, if he takes that down, that's another minimum field goal. The game starts to look a little bit different. And then the Packers, if you're watching the games week to week, they have multiple of those. I know you mentioned Wicks a moment ago, but there's multiple times we're talking about Wicks, not making receptions where he should be for first downs or for potential touchdowns. So I think that's just something that they're going to have to clean up. And I guess I'm kind of looking at this offense as where they were this time last year versus where they are now, and the step forward they took through the second half of the season. And I might be being overly optimistic, but I see that step forward happening. Like they have the 2 interceptions in this. Some of that's on Love, some of that's on how those interceptions came about, with the receivers as well. So I'm optimistic that they were able to see this one out and how the defense played against the pass. But there's a lot of things for the Packers to clean up. The one thing I was positive about is I know Jacobs gets the 5 targets, but only gets the 12 carries versus the 33 pass attempts for Love. The team needs to be on his shoulders for every game, and then that'll give the opportunities to the receiving options on the roster. You mentioned Christian Watson. I was surprised that his usage was just the 2 targets, the 1 reception in this particular game. But there's also parts of this game that I think that I'm hoping is going to get cleaned up here as we move forward. Shawn, the next thing I want to talk about, I think so far, I've done the overreaction. The overreaction that has won the entire show is Josh Jacobs, a capable running back. I think Shawn has drawn the line at that particular one, but I'm going to toss one out here because Jahmyr Gibbs is a monster game and this, and we're going to talk about the running backs as we work through. He had the highest score of the week to date before Monday Night Football. Tremendous performance. He has 15 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also has 4 for 44 in the receiving game with those 4 targets. Looks great, looks electric. We also have Amon-Ra St. Brown looking fantastic. Unfortunately, again, we have just the 2 targets for Sam Laporta, 1 reception for 25. You mentioned earlier Jameson Williams. He has 1 target, 1 reception for -4 yards. But looking through the overall scope of this game, Jared Goff, 22 of 25 for 280 and 2 touchdowns. He's been very, very consistent over the last couple of weeks in terms of his, accuracy, his completion percentage. Are we going into the realm of Jared Goff MVP season?
MVP. Colm, that was I got some pushback from Ben last night.
Oh, really? So that's not too hot of a take?
No.
Jordan Love's going to win the MVP, but runner-up, I'll give it to Jared Goff. But he's playing fantastic.
Yeah, when you have 2 running backs like Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and this was the worst game that David Montgomery has played in a long time, it does make it a lot easier.
He was hurt, and then when he came back in, did have that 4th quarter fumble.
But it's one of the reasons why they love to have the 1-2 punch. And it's infuriating. And yet I'm trying to lean into it at this point where they come out in the first drive and they try and just hammer opponents with David Montgomery. That did not work against this borderline elite Minnesota Vikings team in this one. Then they like to bring him back to finish the game off. That also didn't work in this one, in part because he fumbles. And then on the very final possession, they need to pass it. They need Jahmyr Gibbs in there to make sure they get down and win the game. This was a chance for the Vikings to make a huge statement and to really gap both the Lions and the Packers in this NFC North battle, which does seem like it will be for control of the NFC. The other 3 divisions at this point are far, far, far below. I mean, you could take the last place team in the North, in the Chicago Bears, and probably put them in the mix to win any of the other divisions. And they still could be a big problem for these teams in the North. But this game, obviously huge implications down the line. You have the Lions playing on the road. You have the early 10-point lead because the Lions go for the fake punt and do not execute it. They have been very good with those over the last several seasons. But then they really control the game from that point outside of the Montgomery fumble. And the fumbles tend to be a little bit flukier, obviously, than some of these quarterback plays. Now, Jared Goff lost a couple of fumbles as well that they didn't lose as a team. And so we do want to keep that in mind. But the way that he is running this offense, the way you can go week to week, some of the previous weeks you have Jameson Williams as the guy who's tearing the defense apart. He ends up with -4 yards in this game. But we see Amon-Ra St. Brown, and anybody who drafted him, obviously you're still playing him. He was your first round pick. And this is the game you were looking for. Catches all 8 of his targets, goes for 112, has a 35-yard touchdown. The mix of players in this group is absolutely unstoppable, and you could argue, especially for a team like the Vikings that is going really old school. And you love to see, now they're going to be some of the innovative wrinkles that teams are using in 2024 and making their defenses even more effective, where they can put pressure on and still generally not give up big plays. I think it's fun to watch the Vikings. They're not one of these teams that's going to sit back and say, okay, you can have a 19-play, 12-minute field goal drive, and we're fine with that. Like, that sucks the entire game out here. Like, we want to have the ball some. So they get out there, they play intense defense. Saying that I think the Lions and Packers are on a collision course for the NFC Championship game doesn't mean that the Minnesota Vikings are not also right there. But this was a chance for them to really take a big lead, right? There just aren't that many games in an NFL season, and they do blow it in part because you have this combination of perhaps not aggressive enough at the end, mixed in with Sam Darnold maybe, again, just not being good enough. Colm, I want to throw a couple of stats at you to sort of set the scene, and then you tell me where you are on Sam Darnold. He comes into the week, right? So this is the first 6 weeks of the season with the second best touchdown percentage in the NFL behind only Jordan Love. Mainly as a result of that, or in big part because of that, he has an IQR, which is Sports Info Solutions quarterback rating that is adjusted for charting elements, of 107.8, which is number 4 overall. Now, one of the issues that he has had is that he's taking sacks on almost 9% of the dropbacks, which among players with at least 100 pass attempts is 5th worst. So you're still in this group of players, despite the running game, despite Justin Jefferson, despite Jordan Addison, despite the elite scheme that you're working with there from Kevin O'Connell, you're taking sacks. As a result of that, his adjusted net yards per attempt, which is going to include the sack element, pushes him down to number 10. But one of the things that is perhaps especially damning, or perhaps is meaningless, depending on how you want to evaluate these players, which things you think are most important, on points above average per play, which is a translation of EPA, the reality value there of expected points added. You take that, you use the charting, you also determine who within that offensive group, those 11 players, are responsible for what's being accomplished on the given plays. Now, I have to assume that there's some subjectivity here, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to do all of these things perfectly accurately, but he ends up ranking number 18 there. And in fairness, Jordan Love also falls well down the list in that group. And you can understand why that would be the case with the receivers that Love has, with Sam Darnold having Justin Jefferson. But you watch this game, and it's almost impossible not to feel like Justin Jefferson is doing all of the work, and that with almost any other QB, he would be even better. And this is a 781-1 line for a player who, especially in a shootout against a defense that does give up a decent amount in the passing game, you could easily see Justin Jefferson going 13 for 160 and 2 or 3 touchdowns, and having that not even be a surprise. And yet he's got to go out there and make highlight play after highlight play after highlight play just to get to these very solid for a superstar. I mean, he scores over 20 points. You're going to take that every single day. But my overreaction is that this Minnesota Vikings team is going to not accomplish their goals this season, and it's going to be because of that J.J. McCarthy injury.
I think that's very possible. The reason I say very possible is I don't think they'll achieve their ambitions, which is, winning the NFC Championship and then winning the Super Bowl. But the part of that, like, and if we have a slightly different outcome, yesterday we have them at 6-0, and then, that picture and that pathway becomes a little bit easier. But if we're looking at would a rookie quarterback have done more? That's the tricky element to evaluate. But Sam Darnold coming into the season, when that injury happened, if we had said what we're getting from him now, we would have got it. I think every Justin Jefferson manager, every Jordan Addison manager would have accepted that at that point. I think he's, in my opinion, still probably surpassing my expectations of what they were going to be starting this season. So I guess I'm looking at it from the limitations that you're mentioning. I'm accepting off those limitations. I guess it's when I look around if we talk about real life football for them, I think they don't hit those objectives. If we're looking though from a fantasy perspective, and then we look around particularly what happened this week with some of the quarterback play around the NFL, there's a lot of the other players on my fantasy rosters that I would be like, Sam Darnold could be the quarterback for them, and I would be happier than their current situation. But
yeah, I mean, I think that
I think he's in the middle of the pack. He's
if you're an
average
Indianapolis
to below
Colts
average.
receiver, then
love him.
You would love to have Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
If you are a Tennessee Titans receiver, you would love to have Sam Darnold.
If you're a Miami Dolphins receiver.
Well, but you're going to get Tua back.
Yeah, you're going to, but you don't have him for those last couple of weeks. Like if he was the backup quarterback there versus here, it would be a big difference. Like that offense has become unusable.
Well, but they did have Sam Darnold as the starter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if you have
he's better than what we've seen then. Like he has improved beyond that point to where he is now, that he's able to sufficiently feed these fantasy football stars. Not to the level where we're like, we want Justin Jefferson to have 9 for 158 and 2 touchdowns, but we're getting halfway there.
And halfway is something, right? I mean, anyone who's
Tyreek Hill
this week, which I mean, I did on all my teams.
All my teams too. Couldn't play.
That, you would love to have Sam Darnold. But this is a game where Sam Darnold throws 27 times, only 12 of them are to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So I guess I would push back a little bit on this idea that you're okay with what he's doing. This is a team that doesn't have TJ Hawkinson yet. I mean, ideally, he's going to come in and it's going to take 6 to 8 targets a game as well. Now, there was strong efficiency actually with some of the other guys. Like Jalen Naylor had a very solid game here. You do, I think, want to get Aaron Jones involved as a receiver. And yet, I just don't think you can come out of a game with those two guys that you lose in a situation where the Detroit Lions defense already was exploitable through the air. And then you have the Aiden Hutchinson injury that should have given them even more significant problems in this one. And just throw 12 passes to Jefferson and Addison. And one of those passes is kind of the back-breaking pass that cost you the game. I mean, his interception targeting Jordan Addison was one of the worst passes of the day. And it's an illustration both of, I think, issues with arm strength, with accuracy, but also even just executing the scheme. Because when O'Connell doesn't get him guys wide open, he's struggling, and or you have to have heroic plays from Justin Jefferson in order to execute. Any normal receiver in this game is a blowout because Justin Jefferson, I mean, they don't make those plays. I mean, Jefferson has multiple highlight catches that you're not going to. I just think you have to be able to still do more than this. I think they would probably be better off if Darnold, for whatever reason, wasn't the starter and they had to go to Mullins, who I think could move the ball more effectively. The problem is that you probably get more turnovers in, which isn't what the Vikings are looking for. I just want to see this team move the ball.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I would rather Darnold in there than Mullins. The part when it goes to, I agree, everything you're saying there, it's not that I'm here to defend Sam Darnold. I agree with everything Sean's saying.
No, you are. That's your role in
that's my role here. I'm the Sam Darnold guy. But in terms of you mentioned the offensive stuff, and we're getting Hawkinson back hopefully soon. I think that's to the benefit of this offense. We see in this game, Johnny Munchon has 5 targets, Josh Oliver has 1 target. Give those 6 targets to TJ Hawkinson. The problem here is some of the, they're throwing it 27 times. They're in a situation here where I think they were just a little bit, they weren't aggressive enough, I think is the way I would put it. They got the big play from Aaron Jones, a 34-yard touchdown over from a turnover. They also, defensively play quite well in this, as much as we've said with the Gibbs and Goff performances. But I think that like this team knows that they're not set up to have success in the way that some of these other teams are, because they have Sam Darnold. But it's also like, this is something like Andy Dalton struggled yesterday, but for years with the Bengals, it was like they had Andy Dalton. Could they get better if they went and drafted a quarterback? Maybe they could. Could they get somebody in free agency? Maybe they could. But they were like, we have Andy Dalton, and like he gets the ball to AJ Green, and we can like be, around 500. And some team, like, I'm not saying that's what the Vikings are going for, but they can't just be a 5-1 team who were, 5-0 before this one and be like, yeah, Sam, you come off here. We're throwing in Mullins to see if we can move the ball further down the field.
So for overreaction week, I am suggesting that a 5-1 QB who averaged almost 10 yards per pass and whose team averaged over 7 yards per play should be benched for a backup who was benched last year for other backups. Colm, this is a game where you just like, let's set the clock to 70 minutes for some of these teams so they can play a full football game. Both of these teams averaged 7 yards per play or more, and the Lions ran 56 plays and the Vikings ran 52. That's not enough for a football game. You got to give us at least 65 plays and let us see these superstars out there on Sunday afternoon.
I do see with some of the offenses again this season, there's that, okay, the game's close. We'll just like keep it going, keep it ticking over, stay close. Oh, it's the fourth quarter. We need to move the ball. Let's use our best plays now. Like, how about we use our best plays and get it to our best players throughout the entire game? That probably would work better. But we'll move on, Shawn, to the next one. And this one's a little bit on the downside. But we obviously had a situation where the Chiefs win again. They are 6-0, 28-18 against the San Francisco 49ers. We have a couple of injuries in this. We have an illness that cost Deebo Samuel the majority of this game, plays a couple of snaps but is not involved. We get an unfortunate, sounds like season-ending injury with an ACL injury to Brandon Ayuk in this one, who had 2 receptions off 6 targets prior to that. Shawn, we've seen Christian McCaffrey on the sideline. We've seen the team get banged up. Has the Super Bowl window closed already for the 49ers?
No. Some of these guys are going to come back, right? You'd like to think that Christian McCaffrey is going to play at some point this season. A lot of people know you just gave Sam Darnold a hard time for an almost flawless game in which he throws the one bad pass that gets picked off. Brock Purdy here, 17 for 31, barely over 200 yards. Now, Purdy, we got to see the competitiveness, and he's another guy that I do have out there in a variety of leagues, probably not in as many as I would have preferred in retrospect, knowing what happened here. But he gets out there, he uses his athleticism. Purdy is one of these guys where that was part of his profile at Iowa State, right? He scores the 2 rushing touchdowns. Unfortunately, if you have other 49ers, that killed the rest of the scoring opportunities. Jordan Mason would have loved to have scored one of those. You would have been pretty excited if George Kittle scores another red zone touchdown. He had come in white hot from that perspective. I still think they have too much talent. Ben and I talked a lot on the show last night about Jacob Cowing and how we like him. Obviously, Ricky Pearsall is back. He didn't play particularly well, but it's still a great story recovering from the gunshot wounds. If he would do, some cool things down the stretch, I think that narrative would be a lot of fun to follow. But Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are stars. They're going to, I don't know. We have no idea what the situation is going to be with Christian McCaffrey, but Jordan Mason, even though he doesn't bring that, and you could say that certainly in this game where Deebo also goes out, you can see what happens when they don't have that dynamism. Kyle Shanahan is unbelievable at creating space for his guys. I mean, for the last 15, 20 years, anytime that you have a player with some interesting athleticism, the refrain was always, well, just get that guy the ball in space. The last 4 to 5 years, that has kind of fallen out of favor as even something that you hear, because people understand that you can't just say it, right? Teams have to be able to do it. And we understand more or less which teams are able to do it. The 49ers are one, but you do need to have the guys. They didn't have the players like that in this game, or they didn't use Cowling often enough, early enough. He's someone I think they have to actually incorporate into this offense. It would be pretty interesting to know what their internal evaluation is there. He's a guy in deep dynasty leagues I do think you should have stashed. The thing that's helping them is that their division, at least when you look at the Rams and the Cardinals, is very poor. Those have been two of the most disappointing teams in all of football. On the Rams side, obviously injuries play a role. On the Cardinals side, Kyler Murray plays a role. We'll see what the Seahawks can do. The Seahawks looked much better again yesterday than they have for a while with they're not young coaches per se, but with the new coaches there with the Seahawks, I think we're going to have some big ups, big downs as they build this team out. The Seahawks really probably are more pointing toward 2025, 2026 to get their juggernaut in place. Given the struggles of the rest of the teams in the West, that may arrive early. Colm, my overreaction last night, I want to run this one by you, is that based on his performance in 2024 and based on missing Xavier Worthy wide open for the long touchdown yesterday, that Patrick Mahomes is no longer the GOAT, and he is now back in the position where he's got to really do some work if he wants to be considered in the same breath with Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, maybe Drew Brees.
The tricky part on that, I was thinking just about how the season is going, from a fantasy football perspective, and how the last couple of seasons have gone for the Chiefs. They're now 6-0, Shawn, as I mentioned, on the season. Mahomes doesn't have a fantastic game at all. He is
bench Mahomes for Nick Mullins. Can we get that one in there?
Yeah, who can we get in? But we have Patrick Mahomes, 16 of 27, 154, 2 interceptions. Does get the rushing touchdown, has a absolutely spectacular rush down the sideline for 33 yards in the third quarter. Shawn, they're 6-0, lots of injuries. You mentioned the name there, Tom Brady. I feel like this Chiefs team starting to morph into the New England Patriots, not from a perspective of winning multiple Super Bowls, but from that perspective of doesn't matter. Going to win, doesn't really matter. Team sucks, doesn't matter. Going to win. Patrick Mahomes, going to win. Don't let's give Xavier Worthy 8 targets, 3 receptions for 19 yards only, doesn't matter. On the road to the 49ers, doesn't matter. They just seem to just get the job done. So
this game was not competitive.
No, terrible game. Terrible to watch. But in terms of for fantasy, I agree. For reality, I think they're right at the top of the list for the team that's going to be challenging there for the Super Bowl again this season. In terms of some of the struggles, Shawn, we're looking at the offense and what's happening. We're down to talking about Juju Smith-Schuster at this particular point in time, but he has a hamstring injury in this one, so he misses a lot of time. We get Sky Moore in for a target. Looked like he had received it, he dropped it. Kareem Hunt has his 2 rushing touchdowns in this, 22 for 78. They rushed the ball 39 times, Shawn, in this game for 4 rushing touchdowns and 184 yards. Looking around everything here, we're looking at dynamic players who used to want to get the ball out in space and see what they could do with it. We have Travis Kelce, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 17 yards. We have McCall Hardman, 2 targets, 1 reception for 17. One of those in the red zone where he slips, but then does get in on a rushing attempt shortly after that. If we look through the list,
he called the ball in space. That's what we were talking about. They got him the 3 big plays here.
When we look through it, my question on the Chiefs side was going to be, should we be worried about Xavier Worthy? You mentioned the overthrow. There's obviously games change very, very quickly if those are completions rather than incompletions, both for Mahomes and for Worthy. Leads the team in targets, almost double anyone else. We do get Travis Kelce, as I mentioned, with 5. He is the 8. There's the interception, was caused on a target to him where he goes to the ground, whether he was, pushed, tripped, fell over himself, whatever we want to do. But
which one was it on that play?
No comment. So to follow up on that,
Colm is softly suggesting that Xavier just fell over himself, which is what it looked like on that play.
It did look like that. So all that tied together. Now we might not have Juju Smith-Schuster, which again pushes him towards the targets that he would have got here, but it's turning those targets into efficient plays and NFL yards, fantasy points, and so on. We're after coming out of the bye. We're hoping that the uptick in usage occurs after the bye, that things step up and they move forward. I still think that that's going to happen, but there is parts of me when you see plays like that where if he doesn't fall down, he's going to beat that man. He's on a corner route. He's probably making it to the end zone if he can not fall over there. So there's a lot of upside, but is there some concern linked into these performances, or should we not overreact to that?
I think any sort of steady
the quarterback's fault?
Any steady hand at the wheel, at the tiller, what have you, is going to say, look, I mean, Patrick Mahomes, obviously one of the best quarterbacks ever, Xavier Worthy, an underrated college prospect with unreal speed. They're not going to keep missing on these plays. And the potential for a second half breakout for Worthy isn't just there, but the size of it could be just off the charts. I do think that there has to be some concern at this point that Mahomes sort of has the yips, which it's so tough to say that and think that at a point in time where they're 6-0, but I just don't think you run 39 times if you feel like your quarterback is making the plays. This isn't the first time that he's missed Worthy. It's not the first time that he's missed a variety of these players. We talk about how they were going to throw over the top this season with Hollywood Brown. They lose him. It changes the offense. You lose Rashid Rice. It changes the offense. All of those things are true. And yet when the throws are out there to be made, he's missing them. And you could even look to Travis Kelce and say, I mean, Kelce does look done. And, if you have 0 of him in fantasy, then there's some part of that feels like a relief. But as a Chiefs fan and as a fan of great players who seem like they're at least okay guys, it's disappointing. And you do want this to be a case where if he's done that, it's definitive in terms of being him and not simply that Mahomes is now struggling and Andy Reid is comfortable running it 39 times. Colm, Carson Steele touched the ball 6 times in this game. All 6 times I was terrified that ball was going to come out because that's almost the only thing that could have turned this game. And what are they doing? If you just want to waste plays, give it to Samaje Perine, right? So I have a lot of questions about what the Kansas City Chiefs are currently doing. The thing that they have obviously going for them is a front office that has built this team top to bottom in just completely unassailable fashion at this point. I do think they have the NFL's best defense, and that gives you a lot of leeway to play the way that they're playing. It's unfortunate because I think we all want to see Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs score, but that's not where they are right now as a football team.
No, and you mentioned the defense. It's right to mention them. I think that they are the key part of this offense and a little bit, or not offense, this team, this franchise is the word I was looking for. But when we look back to, I mentioned the Tom Brady thing earlier, but, in the start of his career, the defense, not as much an offense, it feels like they've almost morphed into some of those early style Patriots teams. But he now has 6 touchdowns passing, Shawn, on the season to the 8 interceptions. And in terms of passing yards and things like that, he's only got over 245 passing yards on 2 occasions this season, only got over 300 passing yards once. And obviously there's quarterbacks across the league that aren't cresting, the 300-yard mark as much, but there's a lot of struggling numbers in there when you look through it in terms of and when you're watching the game, some of the plays that just weren't there a couple of seasons ago. And something that happened to Aaron Rodgers, at a midpoint of his career was kind of like in the early stages, he had the athletic gifts to make those plays, to throw off balance, and sometimes that leads to bad habits. And I do think at times there is some of those bad habits in Mahomes' game. But we won't just bench him for Nick Mullins. They don't have to make in that trade call just yet to the Vikings ahead of, because they are 6-0, obviously. If he had lost this week, though, Shawn would be making the call. But we are going to leave it there for this edition of RotoViz OT. We will be back with a Wednesday show. Who knows, if you are subscribed to RotoViz Overtime on the podcast feed, you may even get that show on Tuesday afternoon. So make sure you are subscribed to get the shows once they are available. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.